So let's go ahead and come back together. So what we talked about before the break was, as you're thinking about answering interview questions, at least in my personal experience, and I imagine in many of yours, you're kind of being evaluated along four dimensions: your knowledge, your aptitude, your attitude, and your fit. So how can we think about identifying and being able to kind of show off or demonstrate our knowledge, our aptitude, our attitude, and our fit every time we go into an interview and every time we answer a question? So let's think about that. What I want to do is let's move into the next example. So I want you to switch sides. So person A, or if you were asking the question before, you are now going to be asked the question. And if you were being asked the question earlier, now you will be the asker, and you're going to be the one providing feedback. So thinking about this, how would you evaluate the performance of a classification model? So thinking about this, what do you think they are looking for here? If you can, if you are the interviewer, what are you looking for by asking this question? Go ahead and respond in the thread. Okay, obviously we're looking for people's knowledge here. We want you to be able to show off all of the things that you know. Sydney from Atlanta, David from DC, Grace from Atlanta talk about conceptual understanding, or your understanding of a business or a real world problem. So here we want to know, can you bring in the real world context? We know that it's not just enough to identify that we have accuracy, or we can't just say sensitivity, but there's other additional context that we want to be able to identify. Specifically, Alex from Atlanta says false positives versus false negatives. Can we recognize which one is worse? Or can we ask them which one is worse? Okay. So we can also obviously mention a lot of different things here. So we can talk about measures like accuracy, sensitivity, specificity, a confusion matrix. We have F1 score, we have precision recall trade-off, all of that. Brendan from New York mentions we might want to identify common issues with metrics in classification. So what are some maybe limitations or issues that may affect how we evaluate the performance of a classification model? One such example of this might be unbalanced classes. We might, if we're, maybe we're trying to detect fraudulent behavior, but if fraudulent behavior only happens 0.1% of the time, these are severely unbalanced classes. We need to demonstrate some real world understanding beyond accuracy. So we want to show how we're able to identify these metrics in the context of our situation. So there's many different things that we can look at here. One additional note that you may want to make, or a couple of additional notes. One is, think about a baseline model. An accuracy of 90% sounds good, but if you have, if 89% of observations are in one class, or if 92% of observations are in one class, then maybe, a model that has 89 or 90% accuracy might not be that good at all. So you want to be cognizant of what that baseline model is, and you can talk about the improvement of your metrics relative to that baseline. Something else that you may want to do is ask about whether or not it's binary. So in many cases, we talk about classification in the context of binary classification, and anything that's multi-class can be made into binary classification. But if you're talking about, and I know many of you are looking at how to predict things in the context of your capstones, and you might have 3 or more classes. Maybe some of these don't necessarily make sense. It's harder to talk about sensitivity and specificity in those cases. Not impossible, but just harder. So how would you evaluate the performance of a classification model? What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to swap roles. So go ahead and take 1 minute to brainstorm your answer, keeping in mind some of the things that we talked about earlier. And then person B, you will be asking your neighbor and listening to their response. Person A, you are going to be the person responding here. So go ahead, take 1 minute to do that, and then we'll come back together and I'll let you know when you should start asking and answering the question. Okay, so how would you evaluate the performance of a classification model? Go ahead and in the thread, share some takeaways that you have from asking or answering this question. What are some things you noted? What are some things that you kind of wish you had done differently, or things that you say, oh, this actually worked really well for us, and so we would encourage other people to do this? What are some takeaways from asking and answering that question? Okay, so takeaways here. So Hovane says there's a fine line between being non-technical and too technical. Okay. Lance from Chicago, if you bring up a potential pitfall, be ready to offer a solution. One kind of caveat that I agree with this in general. If you recognize a shortcoming with whatever method you're using, can you offer a solution to that? One note that I would make is, while I think that is in general good, be honest about the limitations of what you know. So perhaps in an interview, you're talking about certain things, and I would describe up until the extent that you know, and then pivoting from the knowledge to the aptitude, saying, I would then, at this point, that's what I know right now, but I would likely Google this, or I would likely go and search for research on this to try and answer that. So it's okay if you say, look, I recognize this is an issue. Off the top of my head, I can't solve that issue, but here's the steps I would take to solve that. So show your willingness to find solutions to the problems, even if you don't presently have it. And that's going to show your attitude or your willingness to solve those problems, as well as your aptitude, your ability to try and solve those problems. So David from DC mentions using examples. So consider using examples or analogies. I feel like I use the same types of examples very frequently. In the context of unbalanced classes, I might talk about a Kaggle data set that has West Nile virus, or you can predict the prevalence of West Nile virus or where that might be, but there's like 99.97% of observations do not have West Nile virus. In the context of multi-class classification, I either use the MNIST handwritten digits data set or the IRIS data set. Granted, as an educator, my examples tend to be more of these like education related data sets, but I feel like I have these different data sets or these examples in mind where I know, oh, if we're talking about multi-class classification, let's talk about IRIS. Let's talk about surveys. Let's talk about the MNIST digits data set. Daniel from LA and a number of people are saying you have to be selective in what metrics you want to explain. Sydney from it, or maybe it got deleted, but somebody mentioned, how much detail are you going to go into with talking about true positives, true negatives, false negatives? I mean, we spent 2 lessons, so we could have talked, or we did talk for 4 hours about how to evaluate a classification model. You certainly can't answer 4 hours worth of, or you can't share 4 hours worth of content in a 90-second interview response. However, describe kind of the top line stuff and maybe ask a couple of questions to say, well, are we talking about binary classification? And try and whittle that down so that you can provide a quick answer that shows what you know, but without sounding like you're reading off, well, I can use accuracy, I can use this, sort of listing a laundry list of things. Matt from New York said that. Not sure how much detail to give. People are talking about, related to the examples and analogies, use your project work. So use your specific projects that can help out with that, or the labs that you did that can help out with that. So there's a lot of different things that you might consider here. So those are subject matter questions. I want to now move into talking about coding questions. So coding questions are things that we generally spend a lot of time kind of worried about. And so here, coding questions are often used to evaluate your ability to code and have a specific objective. So there are 4 different examples here, and we'll talk through 2 of these in more detail. But so I've got 4 examples listed. The first, print out each integer from 1 to 100, but if that number is divisible by 3, print fizz. If that number is divisible by 5, print buzz. And if it's divisible by both 3 and 5, print fizz buzz. The next one, the smallest number divisible by 1 through 10 is 2520. Find the smallest number divisible by 1 through 20. The third, write a function that accepts one argument, n, and returns the nth Fibonacci number. If you're not familiar with the Fibonacci sequence, I'm going to zoom in here so we can look at it. This is the start of the Fibonacci sequence. The first 2 numbers are 1 and 1, but then the following number is the sum of the previous 2 numbers. So 1 plus 1 gives us 2. 1 plus 2 gives us 3. 2 plus 3 gives us 5. 3 plus 5 gives us 8. 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, and so on and so forth. So write a function that accepts one argument, n, and returns the nth Fibonacci number. Then finally, suppose I broke a stick in 2 places chosen at random. Excuse me. Using simulations, estimate the probability that the 3 pieces could make a triangle. So in thinking about this, in thinking about these coding questions here, there are a lot of different things that, there's a lot of different things that we can talk about in the context of these coding questions. And it's very easy to get flustered. It's very easy to say, I have no idea how I would do the triangle simulations one. Or I have no idea how I would even start the Fibonacci number 1. And that's okay. But by going through practice questions, hopefully this is something that we can get you to feel a little bit more comfortable about. As you think about this, what I want to emphasize are, what are some of the tools that are going to be your friends here? What are some of the most common things that you have used while coding? And I've got this list here. We've got if, elif, else, for, and while. This is something that we talked about during week 1 in the control flow lesson. Defining a function and returning the result of that function, we talked about during week 1 in the functions lesson. We talked about break, how to break out of a loop. I don't know exactly when we talk about that. I assume that that's week 1, and that might be part of the control flow lesson. Dot append. With dot append, you learned about that during week 1 if you want to append to a list. One note is that there is usually a better way than to append. Appending is probably going to take a lot of memory, because if you're appending or adding a lot of things to a list, that might take a lot of memory up, and appending will take more time than a lot of other methods might. So there's generally going to be a better way, both with respect to time and to space in your computer. But this is something that you can do. Using counter plus equals 1, you learned about that in week 1. You can learn about, or we talked about divisibility, I mod j equal to 0 in week 1. np.random.uniform and np.random.choice, we did that in week 1 as well. So all of these things are things that we talked about in the context of week 1, and you've seen them over and over and over and over and over again. Now, that's not to say that you're never going to use anything in a coding question that goes beyond this. It's not to say that you might never do, have to be expected to do something else. But in general, when it comes to coding questions, they're not going to say fit a linear regression model from scratch, or remind me how to fit a linear regression model in stats models or sklearn or something like that. So Michael from Boston asks, on most coding questions, they give you a computer or expect you to do it on paper like the GA quizzes? Both. So some people might allow you to do it on a computer, like actually in a notebook, where you can kind of iterate and see if you get errors. So I can kind of add a note down here at the bottom. You may be able to do this in a notebook, like a Jupyter notebook. In addition, something that's commonly used is if you were doing like a Google, like a Hangout or on Zoom or something like that, some people may just pull up a notepad, like a blank notepad or a Sublime or an Atom file or something like that, and just have you type in like a text document, where in that case, obviously you can't run anything. For example, when I interviewed with Facebook a long time ago, when I interviewed with Facebook, they asked me to do some coding, and that was in just a text document. There was no way to run it. And in other cases, these are often known as whiteboard challenges. So you might be doing challenges physically on a whiteboard as like by itself, where you just have, an expo marker and you're not even typing stuff out. I've done, actually now that I think about it, yes, I have done all of these, but in my personal experience, more common was doing it in text documents or on whiteboard. I was not able to actually like debug as I was writing it, which is one of the reasons that GA quizzes tend to be more like that, more, they replicate that experience a little bit more what you would expect to see in an interview. So as you think about all of these, the goal here is, well, let me ask you. What is a goal, or what are the goals of doing coding questions like this? Go ahead and respond to the thread. As we think about knowledge, aptitude, attitude, and fit, what are the goals with coding questions? What are the different things that we might be trying to assess in an interview if we're going to have you code? Go ahead and respond to the thread. Yeah, so why coding questions? So Blake from Chicago, sequential thinking. Kevin from Atlanta, problem-solving methodology. Alex from Atlanta, understand the way you think. Zoe from Atlanta, the way you think and how you approach problems. So they want to know, what is your thought process? What is your thought process as you tackle this? How do you step by step go through this and tackle this problem? None of those problems that I had on the earlier slides are overwhelmingly difficult problems to solve. And if you could sit down and iterate through, you'd be able to, you'd be able to get a solution. And I'm confident that every one of you would be able to do all 4 of those problems given enough time. However, as you think about doing that as part of an interview, they want to know, what is your thought process? In some cases, they want to know, so Zachary Morris says your proficiency with the languages that you'll use on the job. Vaughn from New York says your knowledge and your aptitude. So we want to know that you know the coding languages. I'm going to say well enough put that in quotes. That's not like a formal term, but in general, most organizations are not going to say, oh, build me an API from scratch in Python while I watch you do it, because that's ridiculous. And nobody would actually do that. However, in these cases, you will sometimes see coding questions where they want you to be able to show your thought process and show that you know enough Python to be able to kind of do the job. You show your knowledge. One note about this is your ability to kind of wave your hands a little bit and say, okay, I don't know the exact syntax for this, but I'm sure there's a function like this. So for example, let's say that you forgot about how to use the np.random.choice function. You're like, I forget the formal syntax for this or even the name of it. You could probably just be like, you know what, like I need some function that will allow me to randomly pull from a set of objects. I don't remember the exact syntax. I think it's called np.random.choice, but I know that, I want to be able to sample from some list and that's it. Like I don't, and it's okay because in the real world, you're going to be able to look that syntax up. But by being able to say, look, this is the tool I would use. I don't know exactly how right now to use that tool, but that's something that you can kind of emphasize. Blake from Chicago, is it possible that if I put the fact that I know Scala on my resume, I'm asked to specifically use Scala as opposed to Python? It's possible. Like I don't speak for all interviewers. It's possible. I personally would put that in, like, as I mentioned earlier, kind of like in an advanced and a novice section, because in that novice section, it's like, I wouldn't, I want to be able to give myself an out and say, I don't know that well enough. So that's personally what I would do. But it's possible. Just like if you were to say you know German well enough to put German on your resume, and then you're asked to use it in a business context. Well, then they ask you to do the interview in German. You're like, oh, actually, you clearly like don't know German, and they're like, okay, well then why is it on your resume if I can't use this skill? Like I like to think of coding languages in sort of the same sense as spoken languages. So I would personally put it under like the novice section, but that's just me. And that gives you a little bit more of an out saying, look, I'm familiar with this syntax. I know how to use it to look some stuff up, but I can't do anything from scratch or do much from scratch with that. Kenneth asks, sprechen Sie auf Deutsch? Ja, ein bisschen. Ich war ein Austauschschüler, nur eine Stunde von München. For same Yara? Yes. I was a German exchange student 10 years ago, about an hour outside of Munich. I do not know how to say where is the bookstore in Scala. In German, where is the room with the books, is what I would say. Where's the room with the books? Or where's the place with the books? Again, if you don't know how to say it, and dovetailing back into this, if you don't know how to say it, say something else. If you, in the context of what my German teacher taught me in high school, she basically said, look, if you don't know how to say a word, describe it, say something else. In the context of coding questions, you can do the exact same thing here. If you don't know the exact way to solve a problem, that's okay. There are many other ways to solve a problem. You can say, I know I should be able to do it this way, but find a way that works. So in general, I can outline some tips here. Think about your interviewer. So again, put yourself in your interviewer's shoes. When you are working through a coding question, don't stay silent. Let them know your thoughts. Let them know how you are working and what you're thinking. In some cases, they might be willing to provide some additional context to you. They might be able to say, oh, you might try doing this thing. Again, if you can't remember the exact syntax, that's probably going to be okay. If you don't know how to say it, say something else. If you say, I don't remember the exact syntax for the np.random.choice function, or, oh, like I know that I should be able to do this thing, but I can't do this one piece, and I know this piece is important, that's often okay. Unless it's already understood, make sure that you know ahead of time whether like pseudocode is acceptable or if they're looking for a particular language. For example, when I interviewed with Facebook, they had, you could pick R, Python, or SQL to do the coding challenging. In addition, when doing coding questions, coding questions are rarely one and done. So in many cases, they give you a problem and then they then prompt you, say, okay, how would you improve this? How would you make this run faster? How would you make this more memory efficient? So kind of my recommendation to you is to get an answer first, then try improving it. Don't just get an answer, or don't try and jump to the best possible answer, because oftentimes that leads to mistakes. You're already likely to be anxious, so don't do that. Just get an answer, then improve it. So I'm not going to spend time talking about what do you think your interviewer is looking for in this situation. We've got the FizzBuzz problem here. Print out each integer from 1 to 100, but if that number is divisible by 3, print fizz. If it's divisible by 5, print buzz. And if that number is divisible by 3 and 5, print FizzBuzz. To my knowledge, you did this in Scala earlier this week, but I think that it just makes more sense to do it in Python instead of in Scala. So what I'd like to do is take a moment to brainstorm your answer. And I'm going to give you 4 minutes. So person A, you're going to be the asker. Person B, you're the one responding. Now, obviously, you want to solve this problem, but try and keep them in mind. Try and figure out how you're going to verbally talk them through your strategy. And then person A, when person B finishes, provide some feedback. And then if you finish early, talk about how to perhaps improve it if you had more time. So take 1 minute to go ahead and brainstorm your answer here, and then we'll talk to or I'll let you know when to move on to asking and answering the question. What I want to do is I want to, rather than debriefing now, again, it's totally okay if you didn't finish. Rather than debriefing now, what I'd like to do is I want to move on to the next. So person A and B, you're going to swap. So the smallest number divisible by 1 through 10 is 2,520. Find the smallest number divisible by 1 through 20. So again, we could think about what the interviewer is looking for, but in the interest of time, we're just going to shift seats now. So given this question, take a minute to brainstorm how you want to approach this. And then person B, you are asking. Person A, you're responding. So go ahead and take a minute to look through this and brainstorm now. Okay, let's go ahead and come back together. So I know that you likely were not able to finish both coding challenges, but that's okay. The first question I have for you is think about when you were giving the answer to either coding question. How did you feel giving the answer? What were the things that you thought about giving the answer? Some of the challenges you identified or things that you felt might have gone well. How did you feel giving the answer? Go ahead and respond in the thread. Will from Denver felt confident giving his answer because he had done the problem before. Totally fair. If it's a problem that you've done before, then that might be, it will probably help you to feel better. But even with that, it might not be. You might not feel, even if you've done it before, that might even add extra pressure if you're like, shoot, I feel like I should know how to do this. So Julia from DC mentions anxious. Sarah from SF says happy. Anna, feel like I need to write it in my Jupyter notebook first. Remy, it was difficult not to remain silent when thinking out my answer. So I want to add a couple of notes here. So when responding, you might feel anxious. Difficult to speak. Or you might say it's hard to not remain silent. Tried to talk it out, even though I didn't know the answer. I feel dread. I found myself sometimes taking a corrective step back in my narrative, which is totally okay. It's fine to take a step back. Again, remember, this is about your thought process. They want to be able to understand, how do you think? How are you stepping through this? How many times can you say you have written code and not made a mistake? How many times have you been sitting in those chairs and watched me make a mistake, even though I literally have the solution code on my other monitor next to me? I still will make mistakes and still will need to be corrected by you because I misspelled something, or I didn't run a cell, or I just tried to code something on the fly and didn't do it properly. It is perfectly fine to take a step back. If you are in an interview and they are going to not give you the job because you forgot to do, like, set a counter, for example, that's, first off, I can say with near certainty that that is not the case. Second, if that is the case, that's not a place you want to work. But I can't imagine that that would actually be the case. Julia, I felt like it was hard to talk through it while putting my answer together. So that is, it's difficult to try and talk that out or try and speak clearly. My next question is, as the interviewer, what did you notice? As the interviewer, what did you notice? So when you were the person interviewing, what are the things that you noticed or kind of identified that you want to keep in mind? Go ahead and respond to the thread. Oops. He already knew the answer. That might be obvious to note if somebody like immediately knows and can run through it. It was helpful hearing them think aloud. So it was helpful hearing their thoughts. It's kind of like commenting your code. So as you comment your code, but instead you're kind of commenting your code in real time. You're saying, okay, I want to try this thing, or trying your strategy. It's good to hear the logical flow and then see them write the answer. I wanted to help. So Eric from New York mentions that. So in many cases, that might happen. Can't guarantee that. In some companies, like some of the bigger companies, might be instructed not to help at all. But in many cases, if you're stuck, they might say, well, what if you tried doing this? Or have you thought about this? Steve, I was looking for a demonstration that the interviewee knew the terms and the concepts of the language, even if they couldn't solve the algorithm immediately. So think about this in mind. If their goal is to see how you think, try and help the interviewer see how you think as much as possible. So one other note about this is, when I said earlier, so for example, John asked about how hard is the 2520 question in terms of Code Wars CADA. I'm not certain. I did not pull that from Code Wars, although it's a relatively common question. I actually pulled that from an interview that I was asked. However, here I want to kind of drill something home. Start by getting an answer, then improving it. So for example, what I want to do is I want to say, okay, let's figure out, the number, or the number 2520 is the smallest number divisible by 1 through 10. What is the smallest number divisible by 1 through 20? So there's a number of ways to go about this. And the way that I would start is I would just say, for I in range 20 factorial, because I know, 20 factorial, or 20 times 19 times 18 times 17. 20 factorial is a really big number, but I know it's divisible by 1 through 20 because it's just 1 through 20 multiplied together. This is not the actual definite, or that's not how you would do factorial. You actually have to import factorial from math. But if you forget that, you could just say, look, I know that there's a way to import factorial, but I don't remember. So I'm just going to write out 20 exclamation point being 20 factorial here. So for I in range 20 factorial, and then if I mod 1 equals 0, and I mod 2 equals 0, and I mod 3 equals 0, and all the way down to I mod 20 equals 0, then you just want to print I and then break, or you want to stop. So you could do this, and this would be getting an answer that works. Then, but you say this is very, very inefficient. So you say, okay, how can I make this more efficient? Well, there's a couple of things that I could do. I know that if I were to iterate through this, I would be able to eventually find the smallest number that's divisible by 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 all the way up to 20. But I look at this and I say, well, every number is divisible by 1. So maybe I get rid of this. And if a number is divisible by 2 and 3, then it's also divisible by 6. So wherever I mod 6 equals 0, maybe I can get rid of that. And you can start taking out additional stuff here. So these are things that you can do. However, and Brendan from New York says least common multiple, or LCM. So you could use the least common multiple to do that. You can kind of find that least common multiple by doing some math on the front end that gets you an answer much quicker. And that's fine if you know how to do that method. However, if you, like me, don't know off the top of your head how you would do that, or even where you would start with that, my strong recommendation to you is get an answer that works. This is horribly inefficient, but get an answer that works, then try to improve it. Because I know for me personally, if I'm anxious and I say, okay, I need to remember I can divide by 2 or by 5, but then I can cancel out 10, and I can cancel out 20, and doing all of that stuff in my head ahead of time, I'm going to make mistakes. Start with the basics, do what you think you can do, and then once you have, what you think you can do there, and you know that you've got an answer that works, then try to improve it. That would be my recommendation to you. So Vaughn asked a question earlier. What happens if you do something wrong? Or what happens if maybe you can't get an answer? Follow up with the interviewer later with a correct answer to the code. Why do I recommend, and I know we're almost at time, we're almost done here. Why would I recommend that you do this? Follow up with the interviewer later with the correct answer to the code. Respond to the thread. Why do I recommend that you should do this thing? Okay, show we care. Shows initiative. Shows that you care about solving problems. It shows your ability. I'd also say it might show your aptitude. I did not know this when I was in front of you, and now I show you that I have known this. I am willing to learn. Which has to do with your attitude. You stand out. They will remember you much more than had you otherwise just not done anything. You stand out more in their mind. You don't give up. I had to do this. I did this for my GA interview, actually. I started with Python. Had not used Python as much as I sort of thought I had. Got some questions that I did not know how to do. I embarrassed myself and couldn't do that. I am grateful that I was able to follow up and say, look, I went home that night and did this 25-20 question. And I said, look, didn't know how to do it there, but, and kept getting integer overflow issues because at that time it was Python 2. And so when you did for I in range 20 factorial, it was a list that it had to store. And that was something that I was not able to do at that point. But I followed up with the correct answer later, showed how I got it, and then tried to optimize it. And they said, they welcomed me back and said, look, study your Python. We're going to bring you back in for basically another attempt at this with a different set of problems in a week, and show us that this isn't just a fluke and that you can actually do this. And so I'm obviously very grateful that they afforded me that opportunity. So again, this is based on my personal experiences, but there is little to no downside to following up with the interviewer later with the correct answer to that code. Worst case scenario, if they're not going to give you the job, then, following up with that answer, can really only move them in one direction. That's toward a yes. They can't not give you the job multiple times. So I recommend that you do this. I've got some resources here for coding questions. There's also plenty of other coding questions that I will share in the repo afterward. So what I want to sort of wrap up with, we didn't cover like the take-home questions that you can be given. I would encourage you, I'll push these slides later and just encourage you to use those take-home questions as a reference. But my final takeaway, and I know that we're on the hour here, try to relax as much as possible. In most situations, companies are not looking to exclude you, but they're looking to hire you. They're looking to hire people. The shorter that process is, the better everything is going to go. They want to say yes. Give them reasons to say yes. And we can often boil a lot of those reasons for saying yes down to your knowledge, your aptitude, your attitude, and your fit. And to Kenneth's point about being natural, the more that you can make an interview a conversation, the better. They will be put at ease. You will be put at ease. The more you can just turn it into like a, hey, we like each other. We know we can hang out and we can talk about these things, the better it will likely be. So these are kind of my final takeaways for this. So with that said, I hope that this was helpful. What I'm going to do, so to Anna's question, I'm going to put this on, I'm going to put as part of the Course Info repo. So within the next hour, you're going to see all of this stuff in Course Info, and I'll flag it for you in the East Coast and the West Coast channels. So with that being said, I know it's a moment after 6, so I appreciate you sticking around if you were able to do so. And if not, I also understand that. This is recording. You will have the recording, I promise. I'm not the one who forgets to record in most cases. But yeah, thank you all very much. I will be back to chat with you on, I believe it's Monday. We'll be doing like our goodbyes and all of that then. But have a wonderful rest of your day and your week and your weekend and all of that. Best of luck with your capstone projects. And then I look forward to chatting with you, and be sure to fill out this form as you go on interviews. We want to be able to help you, help us help you. So take care. Have a great evening, everybody. And I'll see you on Monday.